Welcome to O's Across the Pond, the show covering all things Baltimore Orioles, but from a fresh European perspective. Join us for the highs, the lows, the heartbreaks, and everything in between. Whether you're a die-hard fan or just discovering Birdland, this is your home for passionate, across-the-pond Orioles talk. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to a very special episode of O's Across the Pond. This episode is slightly different to what we usually talk about, which is all things Orioles. Today we are taking you on a whistle-stop tour of all things GB baseball and softball. With that, I am pleased to announce today's special guest, Chris Knoblock from Baseball Softball UK, joins me. Welcome to the show, Chris. Thank you for taking your time out of your schedule to join me. Why don't you tell us about Why don't you tell us about your journey in sports and the business side of sports and how you have ended up over here working for Team GB?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Thomas. Apologies for cutting you off there. I'm really excited to be on the pod. As someone who grew up with an AL East fandom, I'm originally from Boston. I have watched an inordinate number of Orioles games in my time. Particularly, they were the cheap tickets that we used to be able to get at Fenway and do that multiple times a year with my dad and I. So I grew up watching a lot of baseball, being around baseball. My dad played baseball in college, and I started playing at a really young age. But I was never one of the best players. And when I got to college, I went to the University of Maine. I tried to walk onto the team. Didn't think I was going to make it. Didn't end up making it. And after my tryout, I walked off the field into our Memorial Union and the radio station and have been doing press and broadcasting for sport ever since. Been doing it now for 15 years and been over here in the UK for the last 5. And it's given me so many incredible opportunities between the London series, working with the national teams as the press officer for Great Britain Baseball and for the Great Britain Women's Softball program, and now being part of this Olympic journey while all the time watching the sports grow over here. It's an incredibly rewarding experience, and I'm very, very lucky to have this role and opportunity.
Yeah, I can imagine it to be a rewarding experience considering the size of the sport out in the US, and then obviously it is a growing game out here in the UK. So with that, how would you describe the current state of baseball and softball in the UK?
It's a very good question. It's easy to get bogged down in the minutia of what individual teams are struggling with, and each team and each club have their own challenges and have their own advantages, and I think you can really get bogged down in all of those individual challenges. But the fact of the matter is that the sports right now, both baseball and softball, are relatively stable here in the UK. They're in a period of growth, certainly. But it's slow growth, and while we have all these fireworks moments with the London series, with the Olympics coming up, with the World Baseball Classic next March, those fireworks moments have not yet translated into a lot more people playing. They're great for visibility, and they're great for the energy around the sports, but we still have yet to translate that into a large number of people getting out and playing on a daily basis. All in, we've got about 10,000 active players, maybe a little bit less than that, between the two sports in the country. And in looking at where the sports can go, there's certainly a lot of opportunity. But the questions now come down to how we get the funding in to make those opportunities happen, how we can become a little bit more organized, and how the continuing professionalization of the sports management, which is not to say that the sports are becoming professional, but how they're being managed becomes professional, how that transition is working so that between the three organizations involved in the sports, we can streamline and make things easier and better for those playing on a Saturday and a Sunday.
Well, with obviously facing all of those challenges, what would you say is the biggest barrier then to the growth right now? Is it funding, facilities, visibility, or something else?
I would say that it's certainly a combination of the three, and you feel those different pressures at different times. Certainly with facilities, there are a couple clubs who have very nice facilities, but most clubs, and particularly on the softball side of things, are turn up and play in a field with some throwdown bases. So certainly we could always use more facilities, but I think overall the challenge is going to be funding. And that's not to say that we don't get funded at a nice level by Sport England and UK Sport for the national teams, but there's always a need for more funding. The prices of everything have gone up in the past few years. We're still in a cost of living crisis. So any type of income for the sports is always going to be welcome. And really, as we look at those firework moments that I just mentioned, that's where we can take advantage of those big moments, like a London Series, like a World Baseball Classic, is to drive that revenue. It's a challenge to communicate that sometimes to the wider public, because it doesn't always make logical sense from the outside. But this is one of the reasons why we have rosters for our national teams that are foreign-based for the most part. It has nothing to do with whether we'd like to have a domestic or foreign-based roster at all. But the way that the system is set up, particularly here in the UK, is that the more you win at that high level, the more income you can get for your teams and for your sports. So it is a very interesting model where it's top-down rather than youth up. But that top-down model is what's going to get us the funding that allows us to build up the youth program that will make these sports much stronger. So it is quite an interesting conundrum in looking at the basically trickle-down economics, but that's how the system is set up, and that's why our national teams have such an important role to play in the domestic development. It's their job to get the interest in funding that will then funnel down to that domestic program.
Obviously, with you saying there about the top-down model, and that is what is going to get you funding to carry on the improvement and the growth of the sport. What initiatives are currently in place to grow the sport in both baseball and softball across all age groups?
Sure. So the British Baseball Federation published a strategy, I want to say it was 2 years ago, and it's on their website, called Our Future. And what that is a 15-year plan on how they're going to grow the sport of baseball. And it's our job as BSUK to take that plan, to challenge it with what a business needs to operate. So we of course need to make sure that the business is still in operation, but then it's to execute that plan to the best of our ability and bring those synergies up and running. And as far as that's going, with the BBF rejoining BSUK's board this year, that's going quite well. And that is certainly on the trajectory that we would want it to be at this early stage of development. Softball things are a little bit further behind, but that's something where Baseball Softball UK has been able to help. We certainly have the Hit the Pitch program, which is a softball participation program that we can use to help get people playing. A lot of the focus right now is on making sure that we have really robust systems to make sure the sports are safe, that our minimum standards are aligned across the country, that coaching is at a high level. And a lot of that was prompted by the White Report from a couple of years ago about gymnastics. You may have seen that in the news. And from that report, which was very negative, came from a situation of quite a lot of concern over gymnastics, we were able to take on their learnings and start implementing some new systems that will help us secure the sports. So in this specific moment, there is a little bit more inward looking than perhaps normal as we try and get these systems up and running. But in this month of June, we're going to launch the new coaching playbook, which is a project between all three organizations that will redo coach education for baseball and softball in this country. It's the first time we've undertaken this work. It is a really, really strong program of basic standards and basic certification, but also continuing coach professional development, which is really exciting. And that is one of the best things I've worked on in my tenure at BSUK, and I'm really excited to unveil that because it shows what can happen when all three organizations are firing on all cylinders, and it's the start of more great work like that, not the end.
How would you say youth development is being handled? Are the academies, schools invested in the sport, or what roles are universities and colleges playing in the development of players in this country?
Sure. So it's very different, obviously, to the U.S. and some other countries. And one of the ways that it's very different is not on the baseball side, but rather on softball. Because in softball in the UK, they play slow pitch softball at universities. Whereas our national team that plays in the Olympics and what they play in the United States is fast pitch softball. It's a completely different discipline of the game. So that is very different. And right now, in terms of fast pitch development, our best fast pitch players in this country go to the United States or go to North America, go to Japan to hone their craft, because that's where they can play the best competition.
Yeah.
So for fast pitch softball, that's the model that we currently have. There is the Great Britain Fast Pitch League, but it's relatively small. And fast pitch, that is an area that we're looking at with some specificity on to improve. That is something that we need to improve on the development. With baseball, there is a renewed look into Little League, and they have addressed a lot of youth development through the Our Future plan. And in looking through that plan, there is a lot of targeted growth and development around youth that will be announced later. I don't want to preempt the BBF's announcements here, of course, but you will have seen some of the women and girls festivals that are popping up around the country. I think Greenwich is hosting one soon, and those are a start of the youth initiatives targeted at very specific audiences, but they're all designed to get people who aren't playing involved at a really low stress way, which is really exciting. At the university level, we are starting to see scholarships for baseball, which is really, really exciting. UCLan had the first scholarships given out to male baseball players 2 years ago and a female baseball and softball player last year. That's really, really exciting, because that is the first time we've had baseball and softball athletes paid to play baseball and softball at their university in the UK. That's very common over in the US, but over here that is completely new. And so UCLan taking that step has motivated other universities to start looking at those scholarships as well, which is really exciting. And then in terms of slow pitch softball, right now it's very much a recreational game. There is some competitiveness to it, but the development right now is on a league basis. So the leagues develop their own youth sections. From where I sit on my daily basis, I would love to see a little bit more of a centralized approach to this youth development, and then more regional work, because the UK is such a regional country. To break it up by regions, that for me would make a lot of sense, because that's what the Little League model is over in the United States and even around the world. They have a regional model in the Philippines, they have a regional model even in Japan. And that could be one of the ways that we look to take things forward. But in terms of youth development, I would also say that in the past couple of years, it's really become a focal point for both federations, specifically the BBF. And there is very much the understanding that without a strong youth section, the sports won't thrive. So there's a lot of effort being put into that. One other big factor with youth development is that we now, by virtue of being back in the Olympics, we have the top prize available to a youth player, which is the goal of representing your country at the Olympics. We've not had that consistently since 2008. The GB women's softball team almost made the Olympics in 2019. They lost to Italy in the qualifying game, but we didn't know when we were going to get that next opportunity. To have that 9 years later, and in Los Angeles and Oklahoma City, which is a huge market, that's really important for us. So a lot of the effort going into the qualification for the Olympics and to improve our national team standing, that is to motivate a youth section that it's not just youth baseball and softball players, but people who are interested in high performance sport and interested in representing their country at the highest possible level. I think people will be surprised how much the Olympics really motivate younger people to get involved in our sport. Mostly because we've not had that opportunity in the social media age, I should say. We've had the opportunity before, but that was a long, long time ago, in 2006. I won't tell you how old I was then, but suffice to say, I wouldn't have been involved. So that's really exciting. And in my role as press officer, I have two basic goals, which is inspire the next generation and generate revenue with those national teams. And that's kind of where that trickle down comes from.
Going back to what you said about making the game regional and like splitting it up, because that's how it is over in the States and in other markets in Japan. What else would you say the biggest differences between the baseball and softball scene here in the UK and then obviously the more established markets like the US, Japan, Dominican Republic, Mexico?
Yeah, sure. It's not as different as you might expect. I think that's the key thing. The facilities are going to be the thing that stands out the most, and the money that's available for those facilities, we're not on the same scale at the moment, and that's okay. We'll get there eventually. But a municipal field in the U.S. likely has multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars to work with on a yearly basis, and that's simply just not where the sports are at within the country just yet. That being said, I think there's more that we can borrow from other countries to kind of skip ahead a little bit than trying to figure it out on our own. We know that the UK is a very regional country. That's an advantage. We can divide things up in a relatively easy way. But we also know that one of the challenges is to get outside of London. And one thing I'm very, very conscious of is how London Central and London-centric, I should say, the NBL currently is. It's not always been that way, but with 4 of the 5 teams within an hour of London, and the 5th team being in Sheffield, that's going to be really challenging for a national baseball league. So I think the idea, I mean, this is just my idea, but the idea behind a regional model would be to alleviate some of those travel stresses and costs. Yeah. And with all of the challenges that we have, bringing costs down is one of the biggest ones, just as much as it is bringing up revenue. I mean, I think it's, last time I checked, it was a dozen baseballs are like 60 quid over here. A dozen baseballs are maybe at $12 in the US for some cheap ones. So there is part of this that's an economy of scale, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so eager for the organizations to work together. But we have much more power together than we do as individual sports. We have much more interest from sponsors as together than as individual sports at the moment. And there will be a time where we need to diverge again. But I think as we move forward, an aligned approach will really help us stretch those limited resources to have the maximum effect. In terms of the regionality with academies, we are redesigning the academy program again this year. The challenge we've had with the academies is COVID really impacted the ability to run them. And not quite in the way you would think. We had interest in running the academies both COVID years, but the government had booked out all of the sports halls in the country for vaccines. So we literally could not find places to even run our indoor softball league or to have academies. And having that 2-3 year layoff has made it quite challenging with changing personnel and changing ways of working for us to maintain that. But the academy program is currently being looked at by all 3 parties. There's a couple of different strands that are being looked at. The academy for the vast majority of people, as well as the academy, High Performance Academy was the moniker it was under, and that was for the national team program. And that's being redeveloped under all 3 organizations' auspices. With regionality, our coaching playbook is designed now to be delivered across multiple regions. So long as we can get 10 coaches in a room, we'll deliver it anywhere, and we don't have a set space or a set requirement. Obviously, we would prefer a sports hall, but we are designing a lot of programs now to work wherever we can work them, not to work specifically in one area. To be honest, Baseball Softball UK, for us to be most effective, is for us not to think in the minutia. While we would love to be able to help out each club individually, our job really is to help out the most clubs we possibly can at once and have that larger impact across the entire sport. It is a different way of us working, but we kind of need to take that step back and that satellite view on how we can have the largest impact across all of the sports and make sure that we are achieving what the federations have set out to achieve.
Yeah, obviously the challenges that you faced, as you say, during COVID, for a small market in the UK to have the whole country probably shut down pretty much for 2 years, is going to have a detrimental effect. When you look at any sport across the world and you talk about growth, for me, one of the 2 biggest things are visibility and media. Now, here in the UK, we're lucky. Obviously, we can access MLB TV, pretty much across all American sports. You've got NBA TV, you've got NFL TV here in the UK. Now, obviously, the size of the sport in the UK at the moment, it's not probably going to warrant that amount of investment into setting up a massive media channel like that. Or
except we set one up 2 years ago, and it already exists. Yeah. So BSUK TV carries every single one of the NBL's games this year, which is really exciting. And it's completely free to watch on Archive. The only cost would be if you wanted to download the video, which we think is pretty fair. And that the cost to download is actually the cost for us to run a game. So one download means we don't then have a cost to pay out. But BSUK has taken on itself to pay for this network for a couple of years so we can build up that interest and build up that audience. I agree with you. Visibility is certainly a challenge, and we are... the best thing is we're not even on the top 5 of the other list on the BBC's website right now. So we have quite a mountain to climb. Fortunately, that's where these firework events, London Series, World Baseball Classic, that's where they come in. And last year, the World Baseball Classic, once Great Britain won their game at the last Classic against Colombia, the interest that we saw, I don't know if you can actually see it behind me, but this is the article that was published on page 5 of the Times. And it says, Team GB's striking baseball success. Now, Team GB, that's copyright of the British Olympic Association. We're not allowed to use that, but the Times can do whatever they'd like. But to have this be the second story in the newspaper, the Times, the day after we qualified for the World Baseball Classic, I believe it was, that is a huge, huge thing to get. Winning breeds media attention. And so part of my role this year is to line up all the ducks that once we win, we can go crazy. We can distribute that highlight. We can get those photos out. We can get the story out. We can line up interviews, everything. But it's not just about winning, because we can't control what happens on the field. And so my job for the next 9 months for the World Baseball Classic, right now for the next year's World Cup for softball, which Great Britain has to qualify for, and in the lead up to the Olympics, I am putting the call out to find reporters and journalists and media outlets who are interested in our sport, interested in high-performance sport, interested in the stories that we can bring to bear from having a foreign-based roster who have deep, deep ties to the UK. That is my job right now, is to create that media interest. Part of that work is on getting that external media. We need other people to talk about us. We can't do it internally on our own. But part of that is also knowing that it's an uphill battle to do that and creating our own content. And you're going to start seeing programs from both of the senior national teams, as well as the U23s in baseball and the U18s in softball, that speaks to how they prepare for tournaments, how they get themselves ready to be the best they can be tactically, technically, physically, and mentally. What it means to them to represent Great Britain. The new head coach of Great Britain baseball is Brad Marcelino. He's a multi-generational British baseball player, born in Essex. He's a Hall of Famer. He played for Great Britain. We want to explore that story. He also recruited Harry Ford, who is probably the most visible and most well-known baseball player who can represent Great Britain right now, or at least is known to the public. And so that is... those stories are going to be the mechanism that we use to get that attention. Baseball and softball, with great respect to the sport I love, that's not going to be the hook. The hook is why it matters. The hook is the stories about those players and what it means to them to represent Great Britain, and what impact they can then have on the domestic game. And that's what we're going to explore, and that's how we're going to drive that interest. It is a lot of work. I won't share what my budget is, but it is minuscule. We are going to make up for it with hard work, with a little bit of trickery, and I say that in a good way. We're going to use every trick we have in the book to make this work, and we are going to out-hustle every other team that we can to have that big impact when the World Baseball Classic comes.
Obviously, talk about the World Baseball Classic and the Olympics, so looking ahead to the future vision of the sport, where do you see British baseball and softball in the next 5-10 years? So
that's a really challenging question in the moment. And so I say that because it's not entirely within our gift. So the collective bargaining agreement with Major League Baseball expires at the end of next year. That's why there have been no London series announced after next year. Yeah. We expect them to come back to London, but we don't know what that will look like. And that will be part of the negotiation. So that's out of our hands. We are part of this Olympic path, but we have not yet qualified for the Olympics. We're not even sure what the Olympic qualifier will look like yet, but that'll be in 2027. So that is kind of the last thing we can officially plan for with the national teams, is that Olympic qualifier in 2027. I do think baseball and softball in Britain are kind of at an inflection point. This is kind of a tipping point moment for us. There is either a desire to really update the the way that we work and professionalize the way we work and become something a bit more in the model of USA baseball and softball. That is not to say that we are copying them, but they are a completely professional run organization. They've got their own offices, they run their own stadium, they are very buttoned up, and they do this full-time every day to run the sports. And if we want to grow to where the ambition of the sports is, that is what's going to be required. There is also the option that maybe this is where baseball and softball are in this country, and that's okay. Maybe it's not at something where we can have 20 NBL teams one day. Maybe we're going to peak at 8, and it's who's available on a year-by-year basis. And if that's the case, that's okay too. It's just about then making sure that we can maintain what we currently have and make sure that everything is safe and effective and is run as well as possible. I personally think that there's a lot of potential in Great Britain and with baseball and softball. Put another way, I moved over here. This was how I moved over here, on a work visa. I had no other right to live and work in the UK. It was this job that got me this work visa. And I moved over here, yes, because I wanted a British passport, which I will get in 311 days, and that's great, and I look forward to being British while I get to do these amazing events for Great Britain. But the other reason why I moved over here is I think this market is absolutely the right one for these two sports. This is a bat and ball sport that was invented in this country. The first mention of baseball and softball wasn't 1749 even, it was 1746 in a pretty little pocketbook, the first ever children's book. And the game of baseball, 2 words, was mentioned along with some of the rules. Then we've got the first recorded game in 1749 with the Prince of Wales playing in it. Cricket developed from this, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And so with that much history, with that much commonality between the US and the UK, with the first baseball world championship being won by Great Britain over the US in 1938, there's so much potential for this sport to become part of the British ethos, to become part of the repertoire along with cricket, along with rugby, along with football. But to do that is going to take a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of effort. And there may not be that appetite, and that's okay. If there is that appetite, though, it is time to professionalize, and it's time to go whole hog, because we've got this window that closes in 2028, that after August 2028, nothing is guaranteed. So it is time, as much as I understand wanting to do things methodically and to do things the right way, I'm never going to say we shouldn't do things the right way, but we need to do them the right way and quickly.
And you've mentioned, obviously, the connection between baseball and cricket. It's interesting to me. I'm a huge cricket fan. I've come obviously from these shores. It's football, cricket, rugby. At one point, have all been the 3 major sports. You see now over in the US, they've created the Major League Cricket franchises and leagues, and they're trying to grow the game there. Is there scope for, obviously, baseball UK and softball to work with the likes of the ICC or the ECB to intertwine the growth of the two sports across 2 different markets, learn from each other?
I think there is some scope, but one of the challenges I would say that we would come up is what's in it for them. We are so small, and unfortunately our sports aren't the kindest to a cricket pitch, as I found out after moving over here. And would you believe the cricket clubs aren't then so thrilled with us after we're not kind to their cricket pitch. So I can take that point, and it's a point well made. That being said, we do have some crossover, and one of the things that being part of this Olympic pathway has given me an opportunity to do is to connect with the ECB's communications team, because we didn't have that opportunity until Team GB put us all in one room. They put us in that room. Suddenly I'm connected with the person who runs comms for the 100. That is the closest comparable sport to baseball. In fact, you could possibly argue that the 100 was developed from baseball. Yes, it's also from T20 cricket, but there are baseball elements in there. And certainly, and this is meant with all respect to my lovely British colleagues, the shooting of fire out of cannons when you hit a 6, that's American. We're really good at that. So
it's the cheerleaders as well that they have. And
yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but you've borrowed from us this time.
Yeah.
And so that's where there's opportunity, because that crossover is really, really easy. And I think, with a facility like the 108 in London, for example, you would Stuart Broad was doing some videos out there. So now we have some opportunities, and we have facilities where we can actually take advantage of those connections. It's not going to be as close as, come for softball, cricket, stay for softball.
Yeah.
But to have those crossover moments, to have the two comms teams kind of push each other, that's absolutely something I'm exploring right now, and I'm really excited for that, because it does give us a lot of opportunity. The other thing I'd say is that there are a couple MLB teams in the north of the U.S. and the Canadian team, the Toronto Blue Jays, who are starting to develop their own cricket programs that tie in with baseball. We are closely following that, because if there is a way to borrow from those programs, and we do have contacts where we might be able to do so, that's something we would love to explore, because that could potentially enmesh us even more so with the cricket world. So that it's a bit of a watching brief, but it is something that we will take advantage of wherever we can, with the idea that, a rising tide lifts all ships. We're not going to take advantage of cricket. We're going to try and bring our audience, small though it may be, to them, and in exchange for the same work.
Yeah.
So it's definitely an opportunity. And for what it's worth, if anyone has any ideas on how we can do that better, my email, my DMs are always open. I am always open to hearing new ideas. I will say this is a very isolating job, because there is only one of me to do this in the country, and we've got great volunteers. That's not to say that we don't have great volunteers, but they are volunteers, and it's not fair to have the same expectation of those volunteers that people have of myself as a full-time employed communications manager. But it does then fall to me for a lot of this idea generation and creation of content. I would love more ideas. I am always open to it, because I am not by any means the smartest guy in the world. I'm certainly not the smartest guy in the room most times. So please do reach out. We are more than open to suggestions. We want to hear them, because again, it's not about ego. It's about what's best for the sports.
Yeah, I think we've got a massive UK and European Orioles community, and when we discussed sports in general, an awful lot of us are huge cricket fans and huge baseball fans, and there's a lot of similarities between the sports. You see, I think Harry Brook, who's an England international, he's a superstar for the future. I think he's got some kind of sponsorship with the MLB. The back of his bat is covered with MLB stickers. So there are links between that, and I personally think that there is something there where both baseball in the UK can bring fans over from cricket, because there are so many similarities from the sport. As you say, cricket came from baseball and not the other way around, which people seem to think.
On that, there's something really interesting you've just mentioned, is that idea that they're a little bit interchangeable and they can borrow from each other. Baseball is considered America's national pastime, and the word pastime is really important. It's what you do to pass the time. If you've seen Field of Dreams, there's the speech from James Earl Jones in it, where he talks about the history of baseball, and that quote really has always resonated with me. And it's about the passage of time, and how you mark the passing of time is with baseball, because it's been this consistent thing. It's one of the reasons why we actually did BSUK TV, because broadcasting, really the ability to listen or put on a game in the background, is part of the baseball ethos. But that's also part of the cricket ethos. You go out on a Sunday for a long day of cricket, you've got the club, you've got beverages, you've got a way to listen to the game, you've got people to chat with when you're not playing. It's about passing the time. And at that recreational level, even at the basic competitive level, that's what baseball is really all about. The ability to relax, turn your brain off a little bit, talk sports, enjoy sports, and just be with other people who enjoy sports, or even be alone enjoying the sport you're on your own. That is really important to me as we build up this ethos of what baseball and softball is, and it happens to be something that crosses over with cricket.
Yeah, there is definitely something that can work there. So before we finish up, Chris, I'm going to ask you a few personal insights and then a few quick fire fun questions to try and get a little so the listeners can know more about you. So what brought you into the world of UK baseball and softball?
So I had always wanted to live in London since I first visited, which was about 11 years ago now. I had worked in ice hockey, actually, to start my career up until I joined the New Britain Bees in 2016. I was working in ice hockey, but I knew I always wanted to work in baseball and softball. When my time with the Bees came to an end, I actually checked the Baseball Softball UK website every day for more than a year and a half until a job that I could apply for opened up. Then I proceeded to email bomb the entire company. So I had honed in on this as something I really, really wanted to do. I was also applying for some really big name roles within the U.S., but chose this instead because, as I said earlier, I really think that there's a strong appetite for these two sports in this country. If we can get them to land, they will be very British and it will do very, very well. I believe in that strongly enough to have uprooted my whole life to move over here. Yeah. Mind you, I also did this in the middle of the pandemic. That's a whole other podcast to talk about with our dog. So, but yeah, that's why I'm here, is because I believe in this. There are other jobs out there that certainly pay quite a bit more money, but I rather do this.
My next question was going to be, what keeps you motivated despite the challenges? But from spending time with you before we went on air and then the last 35-40 minutes, I can see that you're an extremely self-motivated person. But you know, what else does motivate you to keep going with the challenges that you face on a daily, weekly, annual basis? The challenges with Team GB, the Olympic cycle, funding, growth of the game.
Sure. I think it's a really important question because on the outside, this job looks great. And you know what? It is a great job. I'm not going to tell you it's not. But it is really challenging, too. On a day-to-day basis, certainly with funding, certainly with the number of organizations we currently have, it can be quite challenging. But what keeps me going isn't me. I'm very self-motivated on what I want out of a career, and I'm motivated to work hard. It's something I'm very lucky that I've gotten from my parents and my grandparents, is this work ethic. But it's not about me. It is about the kid who picks up the bat for the first time. It is about playing catch with your dad or mom out in a field one day for 10 minutes and having that memory to look back on. It is about the connections that baseball and softball bring. Drew Spencer, the former head coach of the Great Britain national team, used to talk about baseball and softball as the infinite game, and that it can impact you in infinite ways and across different facets of your life. And I've always taken that one step further. The game is infinite in the ways that it will interact with your life, not just on the field, not just when you're in baseball and softball. The opportunities that have been afforded to me by coming over here and by working with some really special people, I am forever thankful that I got to do them, but I'm also very cognizant that I am an American who is rocked up in the UK and has now managed both of the national teams. My goal is to make myself redundant. I've always said that. I cannot be the voice of British baseball and softball. I'm a decent commentator. I do the World Cups for the WBSC, but the voice of British baseball and softball has to be British one day. The people who should be running the comms for these teams eventually need to be British. We need to build up that capacity because it's not about me. It's about what's best for the sports. Altruism is the way forward for British baseball and softball. What is best for the sports has to be at the heart of all these decisions. We're not going to get rich off these sports. The goal then has to be, how do these sports have the best impact on the most people? That's what motivates me. It is all about everybody else. To the point, I have a tattoo on my arm, and it says, "We are born not for ourselves, but to help others." That's the goal. That's the gig.
Wow. Yeah, you've motivated me there. I mean, when I set out, not just me personally, but when a group of us set out to create this podcast, had been conversations for a while, and then 7 weeks ago, I just turned around and said, should we just do this? and let's see what we can do. And baseball has brought a group of us together. The Orioles has brought a group of us together, and the motivation for us is just to create content and get our word out. We are mindful that we are a group of plucky Brits that are talking about America's favourite pastime, but what it's given me personally in the last 2 months just doing this podcast, but what it's given me in my love of the sport since 2010, when I first went to a ballpark in the States, Oriole Park at Camden Yards, is something that will stick with me forever. And I just want to be able to help grow the game in the UK, but I also want to be able to say to these experienced guys in the US, look, there are guys across the pond who are just as passionate about your game, just as passionate about your pastime, but also are just as knowledgeable and care about the growth of the sport worldwide.
Well, you say just as passionate. I'm going to have to correct you there. More passionate. In the U.S., we're watching games at 7 o'clock at night. What time is it over here? One of the things that I got always from the UK, from working with MLB UK community, they're now MLB UK Clubhouse, is just how passionate you have to be a fan over here. Forget watching, some of these fans watch every single game, and some of those games are on West Coast time, Pacific time. That's nuts. That's crazy. And that's the level of passion that's over here. My job is to show people over in the U.S., look how passionate they are here. This is their sport just as much as it's yours.
Yeah, I've said a few times on previous episodes, I'm at about 92% for watching games live this year. It's been a tiring few days. The O's were on the road in Seattle, so 2 games were with 2:40 a.m. starts. The first game I didn't watch, I had a night off, but I watched the second game that was 2:40, and then last night's game, which was 8:30 p.m. UK time, which was more favourable. But now they're going down to Sacramento to play the Athletics, and the first 2 games are 3 o'clock in the morning. And you can bet your bottom dollar I will be setting my alarm for 2:55 to get up and watch them games. I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate. Yeah.
The passion over here is incredible, and it's just about making sure that people see that. What I will say is that the major league teams have been unbelievably welcoming to British fans. So Jed Oliver just went over to the Detroit Tigers, longtime Tigers fan, which just makes me feel so sorry for the poor man, because longtime Tigers fan in the last 20 years, that's rough. That's really rough. Until Scooble came up. That's rough.
O's fans can sympathise with Tigers fans.
I was going to say, I have a sympathetic audience here. That I know. But so he went over for the first time to the U.S. to experience a Tigers game. And I've seen this happen with the Angels have done it, the Astros have done it with the super fans over here. The Tigers rolled out the red carpet. They got him a jersey. They helped get him tickets. The fans welcomed him with open arms. He was treated like the mayor of Detroit while he was there. That always gives me so much joy to see those major league teams treat the British fans when they come over as royalty, as someone special. That's really exciting to see, and one of the things that I hope for the next London series is that we can almost send back that feeling with the teams that come over, whoever they may be.
Yeah, that's one thing we're looking forward to. Obviously, the announcement soon. So before I go on to a quick fire fun section, what's been your proudest moment so far working for GB?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there are 2 that come to mind. The first was in 2019. So I didn't move to the UK until 2020. And I worked for the first year for BSUK from the east coast of the US while my visa got sorted. A lot of 4 a.m. mornings getting up to work and everything. And I paid my own way to come over for the London series. But the moment I walked up the steps in London Stadium and saw the baseball field, I had the biggest shiver go down my spine, because that was one of the coolest moments of my life, to see a baseball stadium in the center of London that looked like it was natural. And that was a moment, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I will get to experience, I hope, many other things in sports, but that is absolutely one of the pinnacles of my career. Just getting to walk in and see and know that we had a part in helping out with that. That was really, really cool. The second one was the World Baseball Classic qualifier back in 2022 in Regensburg. So I was the press officer for Great Britain, and we were not expected to win that tournament. We weren't expected to qualify against some of the teams that were there. And Drew Spencer put together one of the most entertaining and close-knit teams I've ever been a part of. And the moment that Alex Crosby hit the sacrifice fly was just one of the most special. And I managed to capture it with my iPad. I hopped on the field and I captured them running around the field. And I have this shot from inside the dog pile of Crosby just crying happy. And that meant a lot to me, because my involvement with Great Britain didn't start as the press officer. It started as a broadcaster back in 2021. But really it started when Drew Spencer called me one day and asked me if I could get a couple players released from an Atlantic League team, because I had been a director of baseball ops in the Atlantic League. And I could, because they played for my manager in the Atlantic League. And one of those players was Alex Crosby. Fast forward 18 months later, and he's just qualified Great Britain for the first World Baseball Classic. And he's a guy who I've known and was really good friends with, and a very special player to me. And that was a really, really special moment. Not just because it meant a lot to Crosby and it meant a lot to me, but for what it meant to the program, and to see the tears on some of these guys' faces in the dugout who had been longtime Great Britain players, who had been at the other classic qualifiers where Great Britain hadn't made it. To have that moment of achievement was just so special. That is such a proud moment for me, because it was me being able to interact with the team, doing their best at my best for the best overall product.
Wow, you've definitely had some journey. And before we start to wrap up, I thank you for obviously all the work that you put in with Team GB and growing the game, and with baseball and softball. And I really hope that what you've discussed and the plans and the goals going forward, on a personal level for you, I hope they reach them. On a national level for the sport and the growth of the sport, also I hope they reach them. So, quick fire. A British summer's day in a beer garden, or a drink in an American bar?
Oh, beer. There is no better place on earth than a warm British summer day. And I would also throw it out there that there's no better city on earth than a warm day in London. So absolutely British beer garden, without question.
You've answered my next question. London or New York City?
London, easily. And I'm from Boston. I would say that if I didn't live here.
Boston's a great city. I was there in 2023 to watch the Bruins, so I love Boston. English Sunday roast or a Thanksgiving dinner?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to go with Thanksgiving for that, and that's mostly because my family really goes all out for Thanksgiving. Also, we put the marshmallows on top of the sweet potatoes, and when I've suggested that over here, people stare at me like I've got three heads, just kind of like you did right there. Yeah. So, on that basis alone, I gotta go to Thanksgiving.
Fair enough. Cats or dogs?
Dogs. My wife actually runs a dog care out of our house, so we, on an average day, we have 7 here. And when I moved to the UK, we weren't going to move without our dog, who flew at our feet in the middle of COVID with us to London. So very much a dog person. I love Peanut, love Hazel. Shout them out. They can't hear me and recognize my voice, but I've done it anyway.
and the last one, we've got a running joke on our WhatsApp, on our Orioles WhatsApp group, where we can kind of distinguish the serial killer tendencies of somebody by what by what condiment they have on a hot dog. So, what's your hot dog sauce choice?
See, this one is a challenge for me, because my first game for going to an MLB game wasn't Boston, and it wasn't a Fenway Frank. It was Chicago and the Cubs. What I would have to probably say is a Fenway Frank with ketchup is good. I actually prefer it with barbecue sauce, which is crazier than anything. There is no culture where barbecue sauce gets involved. But the real answer is Italian sausage, peppers, and onions.
Oh, that's. I would say personally that is the best answer we've had so far of all the guests we've had on. We had the usual mustard, ketchup. But
outside Fenway, they used to have a food truck that was El Tiante's food truck, and they would do these hot pepper sausages, and it was just the best. And I got addicted to those. So I do love a Fenway Frank, but I would have to go with the sausage peppers.
Well, I'll put that answer to the group, and we'll see where you rank on our serial killer tendency list. I think you'll rank. I think you're safe because it sounds like an excellent choice.
Well, I mean, safe can mean a lot of things in this context. So,
all that is left for me to say, Chris, is thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the work that you were doing with all things GB, baseball and softball. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come on to our podcast, tell your story, tell the story of Team GB. Thank you to all our listeners. We've reached over 1,000 streams and downloads this week, but we are not stopping. We have plenty of guests to join us over the next 2 weeks. Plenty of episodes to come. This is the first of 3 episodes and interviews I'm recording today. So the content is going to continue to be put out there for you. Don't forget to follow us on all our socials, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and keep the messages coming. Chris, do you just want to let everybody know where they can follow your journey and links for Team GB and the progress of Baseball Softball UK?
Absolutely. You can follow Great Britain Baseball. It's GB_baseball on all social media, Facebook, X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. It's still Twitter. Instagram.
Yeah.
We'll be launching a TikTok soon for GB Baseball. GB Women's Softball is GB Women Softball, all one word. Same channels there. And then you can follow Baseball Softball UK. It's at BSUK on X and Baseball Softball _UK on Instagram. We try and get as much information out as possible. But you can always check us out on our website, baseballsoftballuk.com.
Thank you very much, Chris. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And lastly, to all our O's across the pond, all our O's fans in America, go Orioles. Thanks, Chris.
So much for having me, Thomas. Go O's.
That's it for this episode of O's Across the Pond, bringing Birdland to Europe one episode at a time. Be sure to subscribe, share, and follow along as we keep the Orioles conversation going from this side of the Atlantic. Until next time, stay loud, stay proud, and let's go O's!